David.
Hey, Dave.
Hey. This is going to be a fun day. I know you're a little extra excited, and I think we should kick it off with a very appropriate question, as our questions are meant to be, which is, what's your favorite REM song?
I spent such a ridiculous amount of time over the last 72 hours thinking through how I was going to answer this question, Dave, and I finally settled on going with my favorite live REM song, which is I Believe, off of the Life Search Pageant LP. What about yourself?
Wow, I did not spend 72 hours on this, and I'm going with the ultimate mainstream answer, even after a full review of their entire catalog. Losing My Religion.
Not a bad answer at all, but REM is always a great topic here on Stupid Gen X Tricks, the show for people who used to be cool. But first, we're gonna have Dave explain who the fuck we are and what the hell we're doing here.
All right, you dropped the F-bomb. I like it.
I am fired up and ready to go today, Dave.
Okay, well, I'm Dave because I'm the down-to-earth and approachable one. I will note that that was David's language, so I'm going to take that as a straight-up endorsement of that fact. And David, because you're all stuck up and think you're sophisticated or something, and we've been friends since way back in 1992 when we were a couple of young punks who were helping get Bill Clinton elected president, and Stupid Gen X Tricks is where we try to forget about the sad state of the world for a little while, reminisce about the 80s and 90s when we were young, and think about what that culture from back then was like and what it says about the generation we've become and what we're all about today.
Yeah, so the way the show is going to work today is this. You and me are going to banter agreeably between ourselves, maybe disagreeably. I don't know. We might get to fussing. But we're gonna
that sounds like a Southern phrase.
We're gonna be talking about REM for a few minutes, and then we are going to bring on our special guest, Bertis Downs, who has been REM's lawyer, manager, and advisor over the whole course of their career, from like day one and even after they stopped, being an active band in the world. We're going to pepper him with excited questions and try and get him to spill some tea, and also try and ask a little bit about how the business side of the music business has evolved. And then we will send Bertis on his way and move on to our Wormholes section, where each of us finds some interesting and random info to share with each other and with all of our podcast watchers and listeners. And then we will wrap up the podcast and get on with the rest of our days, which in my case just might include some sort of quesadilla.
Ooh, quesadilla. Are there special Pittsburgh quesadillas out there?
If there are, I haven't yet gotten to them, and they probably wouldn't be good. Pittsburgh suffers in the Mexican food department from a lack of Mexicans living in the area. So
you're talking legit old school Mexican. You're not talking like Tex-Mex, which I think non-Mexican born people are allowed to cook and serve.
I would be fine. We don't have good Tex-Mex either. There's some good Mexican food around, but it's a little bit hard to find, and we are way off on a digression here.
Okay, yes. All right. So back to the main event. We will, of course, be reminding you of how much we appreciate you for subscribing and liking and leaving reviews and doing all the things that make it easier for people to discover this podcast, right? All of you listeners, watchers, You're doing that now? You're clicking on it? You're putting in the comments?
Right at this very moment, I hope.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. High five. It's a long distance high five.
Good work, people.
But let's talk about REM for a bit first. I always liked them. I recall the first time I ever heard of them very specifically because they were teased as a new music video on 120 Minutes, and it was the track Can't Get There From Here from... that's Life's Rich Pageant, right?
Can't Get There From Here.
No. Reconstruction of the Fables. Yeah. Is it Reconstruction of the Fables or Fables of the Reconstruction?
If you look at the album art, it is written both ways, but I think it is generally referred to as Reconstruction of the Fables.
Okay, there you go.
Or excuse me, no, as Fables of the Reconstruction. Excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
But,
All right. It's clear. It's like all these decades later, it's still causing confusion. So why did you finally settle on your final pick, and what were some of the runners up?
So I finally settled on that final pick because it is a song that just like is one of the first images of them in my mind is that song live, specifically at the Madison Square Garden Felt Forum in the fall of 1987 or 86, one of those years. And it just blew me away. And then I saw them play it on many other occasions as well. And it's just always a song that has this great vibrancy, and it captures, I think, the more intense sound that they were moving into in that period, certainly more heavy guitar sound, more rocking, which lent it to live performance. But there's a million others I could have picked. I, for a while, was fixating on some rarer songs like Lightnin' Hopkins, which is one that I always like. I was thinking about Driver 8, which I've always thought of, and I think a lot of people think of as almost the purest distillation of the classic REM sound. I thought about South Central Rain, which was, I think, the first song of theirs I would have heard, certainly the first song of theirs that I remember absolutely loving. Strange Currencies, is one of the later songs that is just beautiful and sings night swimming. What I'm getting at is I love everything about all of their music. It's just always spoken to me as music at a really deep level. I love the fact that they don't have a single sound. I mean, they clearly started out with, a single sound that was something that they really invented, obviously drawing on currents from all sorts of other directions because that's how music works. But it was unique at the time and groundbreaking in a lot of ways, but that they evolved and grew and changed and went in different directions over a long career and always kept it interesting and always did the unexpected. And that's also, part of what I loved about them and love about them, and what a lot of people loved about them was this sense that they were not, even as they got enormously successful, that they were not trying to be, a commercial band. I will talk to Bertis about, how much of that is image and how much of that is reality. But they always seemed like they were trying to chart their own course, right? And that they were resistant to TV. They were resistant to videos. They held off corporate sponsorship. I
think the resistant to videos thing, I might disagree with you on, but keep going.
Well, they eventually came around to that, right? And there's this.
That's how I discovered
thing,
them, after all.
Yeah, that Michael Stipe early on, insisted that if they did videos, he wouldn't lip sync in them, and that was a little fussy and silly, and they moved away from that. And they produced some really great videos, actually, when they did, decide to take that form seriously. During that, I mean, their commercial heyday sort of coincided with that, probably 5 or 7 year period when music video was kind of a real art form of itself. They are a great band who really have seemed to live with integrity, and really seemed to this day to just be good, solid, down to earth citizens.
Yeah. Great band, great vibe, great sound, great history, huge integrity. Super interesting to be talking to someone who clearly helped them form the skeleton of that integrity, or the muscle and strength of it in the legal sense, as well as obviously. I did think about some of the other songs that were up for my favorite, and boy, there's so many good songs. It's really hard to do.
It is a deep, deep catalog.
Yes. So there were 2 others that were in the running, but one from early days is Moral Kiosk. Love that track, and that was close, but I'm a sucker for those moody ballad type tracks, and certainly Losing My Religion does that very well.
Now that we have established all of that, I think I have fanboyed as much as anybody can take without having it connected to some questions for a guest. So we're going to take a quick break in a minute and then bring on our guest who, as we said, is Bertis Downs the fourth. I don't know why we have to note that, but we do. It's part of his name. We'll let him tell the full story himself, but basically Bertis was part of the REM team from the very, very beginning, helped them with their first contracts all the way through to today, where he continues to manage the band's business interests and legacy. So I can't wait.
Yeah, exciting. All right. Well, first we will go to our break with this. Bertis.
Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent.
We're going to start you off with our standard opening question that all of our guests get subjected to. And that is, what was the first album that you ever bought yourself?
Well, this was easy because I remember it very clearly. I bought Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell when I was in approximately the 7th grade, which would have been approximately 67 or 68. And I bought a Treasure Island, which was I don't think we called them that at the time, but it was a big box store, kind of like a Target, on Memorial Drive in Clarkston, Georgia, where I lived I moved there in middle school, moved there in 6th grade. And I think this was about a year later that I bought Wichita Lineman. I bought it right when it came out.
It's a classic, certainly.
And in Arkansas. I'm in Little Rock, so I love that.
Yeah, that's right.
Outstanding. All right. So now getting into the meat of things, I feel fairly sure we would be happy to interview you for 17 hours in minute detail on every part of it, but we're not going to do that to you. So we understand that you've been in REM's orbit from virtually the beginning of their career. You met Peter Buck at a record store, if that's correct, in Athens before they'd even formed, and then started offering some free legal advice. I take it you were in law school at the time.
No, then I would have been practicing law without a license. So I didn't do that. I waited till I got out of law school once I'd passed the bar. And once I was out of law school and a fledgling lawyer, learning how to practice law and going to seminars and learning about entertainment law, kind of by the seat of my pants, and with some of the things we were doing, with some mentors, with the help of some older people who knew what they were doing. So, yeah, but I knew the guys. I knew Peter from Wuxtree, which is kind of a still ongoing record store in Athens. Got to be one of the oldest continually operating record stores anywhere. And I knew Bill from the concert committee at the university. I didn't meet the other two guys, Mike and Michael, till they'd started the band. But I knew Peter and Bill. I was in law school. They were in college from about 79, 80. And then they started the band in 80, and I got out of law school in 81. And that's when they started having, issues, organizational contracts, and started asking me what I thought. And I started giving them, I was a volunteer for quite a while.
So I have to ask, this is a bit of an aside, but since you were there in the very earliest of days and you were on the concert committee at Georgia, I was on the concert committee at Oberlin, where I believe on their first tour, opening for the Beat, or one of their first tours, it would have had to have been.
It wasn't their first tour.
It wasn't.
It might have been one of their first kind of quote unquote big tours with another band, which was English Beat, who was a much bigger band at the time.
Yeah.
They toured all through 80, 81, 82. But by 83, it was starting to feel like, okay, this is like a real thing.
So I got to give.
You were at Oberlin. That's great.
Yes, and then we booked concerts, and we lived the concert board, and I got to shout out Brandon Schmidt and Nick Moyne, dear friends who Brandon went on to manage Interpol, so perhaps you guys crossed paths along the way. Yep. He's got a great record store in New Jersey and was one of our guests. But we couldn't, so the place that REM and the Beat played was called Finney Chapel. It was a beautiful...
Yeah, it was a church.
Yes. Yeah. So do you know the aftermath of that show?
I probably heard it. I know that's where we first met. I think Jane Pratt and definitely Karen Glauber.
Yes.
Those are two, to this day, good friends that I believe were students at Oberlin, which made them a little younger, or right about contemporaries of our guys. And I know that was when they first all connected.
Oh my gosh.
But I wasn't at that show. I was home in Athens teaching law school at the time. That was my main job in those early years.
Okay, so that's amazing. And David, Jane Pratt is Jane Magazine, if I'm remembering correctly,
Correct.
right?
And
I knew I recognized. I knew I recognized that name from somewhere. Yeah. We should try and get her on at some point.
That'd be fun.
But yeah.
So here's the aftermath. The show was so high energy that Pews got torn up, and they wouldn't allow the concert board at Oberlin. We couldn't book anything into Finney for almost a decade after that show, and we finally got them to relent with They Might Be Giants while Brandon and Nick and I were there.
That's great.
So
you were not on the board when REM came through.
No, I was
not. Awfully well preserved to be that old. So, 10 years later that you heard this story and got them to back off this whole prohibition thing. Well, that's good.
It took some work. They were not happy about that show.
The good people still haven't talked. I don't think they can do shows in Cameron Indoor. I think we might have done the last shows in Cameron Indoor Stadium in '87. And after that, the basketball coach there, who's no longer there, was 365, 24 hours a day. As I understand it, no more shows in Cameron. Regardless.
See, they should tear up the name on the court now and just make it the Bertis Downs court at Cameron Indoor instead of naming it after that other guy.
I didn't go there. I think it's fine that it's Coach K, but it was a great place for shows. Not as quaint or not as intimate as the chapel at Oberlin, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing place. All right, well, so we've done a fair amount as Gen Xers of talking about the concept of selling out, which seemed so paramount to our generation, and you guys seem to walk a fine line between indie cred and business success, and that clearly was a path you must have been tasked with, and I wondered if you could reflect on that a little bit.
I really wasn't. It was their band. They had really good instincts. Early on, I realized these guys know what they're doing. They knew what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was write songs, make records, and tour. I mean, those were the main ways they spent their time. It's pretty much all they did for quite a few years, with occasional time off, breaks from all that. But they were on quite a cycle. They made those 5 records in the 5 years, the IRS years, and then the very next year put out their first record on Warner Brothers. And then the records started getting spread out a little bit more every couple of years, sometimes with a bit of a break. But no, I that really wasn't. I mean, I think that my goal was always to help them take what they wanted to do as artists and help translate that to the world, or to take that to the world and have it work in some setting. I'll give you a decent example of that, which is that they didn't want to tour after Out of Time. We just signed with Warner's. We just put out Green. They'd gone on tour just like kind of out of habit. They went on tour for the entire year of 1989. By then, they were a pretty big arena band all over the world, a couple of legs here and in Europe and the Far East. And it was a wearing tour. It definitely takes it out of you, starting in January, ending at Thanksgiving. And they just decided, well, first of all, they're going to certainly take off 88 because they're making another record, which was Green. After they'd done the 89 tour, they decided that they're going to go back in and make another record fairly soon, but they decided pretty early on they weren't going to tour. Well, that's not the best news to a record company, but we all thought there must be ways, and there are ways, to get the word out that REM has a new record out. They had all these records in the IRS years. They toured constantly. It was sort of a self-preservation move. They realized that if they kept touring and they just wore themselves out, ground down to nothing, that there wouldn't be a lot left of a creative force that they were. So it just turned out that the 5 years they took off the road, they didn't tour after either. I'm sure y'all know this, but maybe some of your listeners, they didn't tour after Out of Time, nor did they tour the next album after Automatic for the People. Those just happened to be records that had a lot of good songs on them, and they were willing to do appearances on things like Saturday Night Live, the NPR show called Mountain Stage, various things for the BBC, other parts of Europe. They did tons of like radio, TV. This was pre-internet, or pre-popular internet. Wasn't like you could go do a bunch of webcasts because those didn't exist yet. But they did enough promotional things that people got the word that REM had a new record out and that it had this song like Losing My Religion or like Drive or Everybody Hurts or Man on the Moon. All these songs are out by this band that has albums that people like. And so it was a good way to do it in retrospect, because then by the time they came back and toured in 95, they were a major band and they had not had a record. They had not had a tour in 5 years. There was a lot of pent-up demand. So I won't say that was all well planned out. It certainly wasn't any kind of a master plan, but in retrospect, it was pretty smart. It was a good way to do it. They kept themselves sane and whole as a band and recharged their, I also think that the reason Out of Time and Automatic sound the way they do is they knew they weren't going on tour. They didn't have to worry about this becoming a big stadium filling, play to the back row kind of a record. And by the time they toured again in 95, not only did they have all their IRS stuff to fall back on, they had the 2 recent hit records and they had the brand new record, Monster. So it all, we kind of just went based on, like I say, on their instinct as artists, and then tried to make it work from a business standpoint. And then as it turned out, it did work from a business standpoint.
So going back earlier than that, a story I've always loved that I've heard in various places, but would love you to go into more on, is when they went in to record Murmur after they got the IRS contract, and the label kind of was pushing them to go in a direction that was going to sound like a lot of the other IRS acts at the time. And they kind of said, no, that's not what we do. Tell us how that played out. And there must have been some pretty strong pressure, and that's a pretty hard thing to do, I would think, on a first album.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, Chronic Town came out really well. There were plenty of people, including myself, who thought, well, why release just an EP with 5 songs on it when you got so many other good songs like ready to go? But that was one of the early times that I realized, you know what, these guys know what they're doing. Just it's their band. Let them make it the way they want to make it. By the time Murmur came out, people had heard this little taste of the 5 songs of Chronic Town. So when Murmur came out a few months later, it was a cohesive whole album. And they were, I don't know if pressure's the right word. Certainly it was suggested that don't you want to use a real producer or a producer that's more modern sounding? Because Mitch Easter, who's still a very good friend and still a collaborator in a lot of ways, all through the years, he was from North Carolina. We were recording in a different studio, not his home studio, not the one in Winston-Salem, the drive-in. We'd agreed to go down to Reflection, which was it's no longer there, but it was a real studio in Charlotte. So the band were open to the idea of at least trying somebody else, going in and working with somebody else, and they did. And they just thought that they're going to get better. They wanted to always be, in a certain sense, producing their own records, but they needed help from another person to be a producer. And Mitch just seemed like the right guy to them. And so they had a lot of understanding people at the label. People trusted them. It was with all the different labels that the band were on, the 2 main labels, at those times we're on a different one now. But IRS and Warner's, it was generally a good back and forth. It was a conversation. There were never like hard, fast, we didn't think being at war with a label would be a very good strategy. So it was more of a conversation and just being open to something and then saying, nope, that didn't really work. Let's go with Mitch. We know what we can get from Mitch. And he brought in Don Dixon, who was another very experienced producer, a little bit older than all of us. And between Mitch and Don, they made 2 great records in Murmur and Reckoning.
Yeah. What were some hard decisions?
What were some hard decisions?
Yeah. Like were there moments as an advisor, as a lawyer, where you were, where it was tough to marry the band's vision to the business?
Well, yeah, we just talked about one, not touring after a major album comes out. That's not an easy decision, but you come up with alternatives. You come up with, okay, they don't want to tour. They don't want to go wear themselves out for another year, starting in January, going until November. All right, what could we do? Could we do a month of promo, is what it's called, a promo tour, where you're in New York a few days, you're in LA for a few days, you make this wild trip to West Virginia to do Mountain Stage, you go overseas and do Germany, Italy, you go to a lot of the places you would have been on tour, except you're doing TV and radio shows instead. The BBC has always been incredibly supportive of REM. So much so that a number of years ago, we had the idea and asked the BBC, what about licensing some of the material that we did with you guys, or basically all the material we did with you all, both audio and video. We put out a box set, REM at the BBC. And it was a great little collaboration, joint venture. It didn't sell 1 million copies these days. Nothing really does. But it's on Spotify. It's on the streaming services. And for people who want it, it's a great little collectible piece of REM history of pretty much every show, every appearance, every interview they did with the BBC. So, doing that sort of stuff sufficed to keep the band's profile visible and to let people know, they have a record out. It's kind of frustrating if they didn't, without having to be on tour and do the whole thing. Beyond that, there were other difficult decisions. I don't know how many of them I really feel comfortable talking about, just because, I do have a relationship on a professional level with the band, and I certainly, not that you're asking about this, but I don't gossip about them. I'll tell you mostly things that are already kind of on the public record, and that feels appropriate.
So in those early days, there was a moment, and REM, of course, was probably the central catalyst, or certainly one of the central catalysts to Athens, Georgia, being thought of as maybe the hotspot of music on the planet for a period of time. Maybe, obviously New York, London, places like that are always hotspots, but Athens, there were so many bands, and that's not a predictable spot. Could you help people understand what was going on culturally there that might allow for such innovation musically and visually to come out of a place like that?
I have my theory. I've not written a book about it, and I don't think I ever will, but a couple of people have. Roger Brown wrote a book long ago called Party Out of Bounds, and Grace Elizabeth Hale, professor at UVA, wrote a book recently called Cool Town that was only a few years ago. Those are both like tomes, actual scholarly works of examining exactly that question. My simple theory, and it's probably overly simplified, and it may not even be true, but to me, one of the things that makes Athens kind of exist in this little bubble, first of all, is size and scale. It's fairly small. We're a small city or a big town. We're not a tiny town, but we're certainly not a big city. But we're close enough to Atlanta, close enough to the airport, close enough to the East Coast. Certainly for bands that are going to be on tour, one of the things that kept REM here, it's you got to start and end a tour somewhere, and this is a pretty pleasant place to live. So quality of life kind of things. But in terms of like the real question you're getting at, why so many bands coming from here? And that's been true certainly since the late 70s when the B-52 started, and Pylon, and the REM guys, Side Effects, Love Tractor, a ton of bands. You're right. In the early 80s, this was definitely a place. And then that created its own momentum. Other bands started moving here, whether they sounded like those people or not. So I think it's just kind of the natural friction between kind of the dominant culture. You may have heard that Athens, Georgia is known for two things. One would be music, or often REM. If you're in some other country and people hear you're from Athens, Georgia, they go, oh, that's where REM's from. What's the other thing they're known for?
University
Football.
of Georgia.
Yeah, football. Clearly, it's a big football culture down here, and all that goes along with that. Now, I guess North Carolina has its own football culture, if I'm thinking of Chapel Hill, or I guess all through the SEC and the Big Ten. Every major college town probably has some sort of a music scene, thank goodness, or REM never would have had anywhere to play in a lot of these states in the Midwest and in the South. But, our guys played a lot of college towns in those early years, 82, 83, 84. So I think it's sometimes that kind of that friction between the football, the jocks and the hippies, or whatever the terminology would be. And I think there's a certain amount to that. I think also the fact that Georgia has always had a pretty good art school, a very good art school at UGA. And I think all of the B-52s at one point were enrolled in the art school. Michael Stipe, the singer from REM, was an art student. until he was no longer studying. He was out on the road and touring with the band. So I think you mix all those things together, and it's a creative town. The rent was cheap. It's gotten a lot more expensive now, like everywhere else. But those to me are the most obvious explanations as to why, and otherwise maybe it's just happenstance. And I don't know a really good answer to that.
So once you guys hit the big time, was mainstream success for a band that started out with a very indie edge? Was mainstream success gratifying? Did it feel like they had made it, or was it just another thing to manage?
Well, it was somewhere in between those two. I would say both of those things. Those are not mutually exclusive. Those are not mutually exclusive concepts at all. Was it gratifying? Sure. When you're making music, you're putting music out there. It's great when people like it, when people want to play it on their radio station, when people want to come see the band live, when it becomes something people talk about and want to have the T-shirts, and that's great. It's one of the reasons you're doing it. You don't want to just do it in a vacuum. I mean, I guess some bands just want to do it in a vacuum and do it totally for themselves and don't really care whether or not anybody likes it. REM was always very clear that they were making the music for themselves, and they certainly weren't, trying to cater to a lowest common denominator and that sort of thing. And the other thing is, you got to remember with REM, it was really gradual. I mean, they had the luxury of that 5-year, 5-record deal on IRS. Ended up being 6 if you count Chronic Town. But between 82 and 87, they grew up really fast, and each record did a little better than the last record. Each of those records to this day are beloved in their catalog. There wasn't a clunker in them. And so it was kind of gradual. I mean, many, many people, especially in Europe, assume and expect that Losing My Religion was their first song because it was the first song people heard. It was from their 7th album. And they already had close to 100 songs by then that were kind of out there in the world, and including B-sides and all that. So it was there was an arc of their growth and getting bigger that sort of cushioned them, I think, a little bit to the opposite of an overnight success.
So can you talk a little bit about the last part of their career? Because it's, I think everybody who follows this band agrees, like those first 5 albums are, world-changing, spectacular albums. They move to Warner's. They have some big hits. They then have a period at the end, and particularly after Bill had left the band, where they're making very different kind of music, and it didn't, I think, reach as big an audience, and also the music business was kind of changing at that point. But those are still really good records that, have real power to them. What was that period like?
Well, obviously, it was the 3-legged dog period, because that was a quote not just attributed, but Michael said it. 3-legged dog is still a dog, but it was different, not having the 4 of them. Had always been Barry, Buck, Mills, and Stipe. And when Bill left, it was very clear that he was only going to leave if they agreed they wouldn't break up, that they were writing songs for the next record, and, they were excited about making it. And so they carried on, they made Up, and then Reveal, and then Around the Sun. And then I would say that I think each of those records has strengths and a lot of really good songs. And I also think that, after a while, things get a little bit taken for granted in the marketplace. They didn't tour all those records, but they toured a lot of them. And then in the 00s, ironically, some of their funnest, biggest, most successful tours, especially in Europe, were post Bill Berry. That's where there are just so many great festivals. I know there's great festivals in America too. But the kind of legendary festivals that are now having their 50th anniversaries and stuff, like Glastonbury and Berchter in Belgium, and some of the ones down in Italy and other parts of England. Those were not just festivals, but other shows too. They just had some really, there was a ton of stuff with MTV Europe at the time, which was a big, in 01, we played a huge show in front of the Cologne Cathedral in Cologne, Germany. So, and we played the Olympic Stadium, the original or 100-year-old Olympic Stadium in Athens, Greece, again, with MTV Europe. Those are not easy shows to pull off. Those are shows that you're kind of the whole time hoping and praying that all the security arrangements and that it's all being handled and you get that it works out. It did. But those were when it was just the three guys, and they were still a great band with, in that case, it was Bill Rieflin. Before that, there was a tour with Joey Waronker playing drums. No, it's not the same as having it be the original four guys, but it was still three of the four guys, and those were great tours. In a lot of ways, those were great records. They just, the nostalgia aspect of it, people remembering records from back when they were in college, when they first got married, when they, first got into music, their first album they ever bought, those kind of things. It's real hard to compete with those things later in your career. And I think that any artist you name, that's usually the case. And then there's the Jackknife Lee period, those last two records, Accelerate and Collapse Into Now. I was just thinking the other day, we still keep up with Jackknife a lot. He just did this remix of Radio Free Europe that we've announced it. We're going to get ready to release it in September with cool. Everything going to Radio Free Europe, the real Radio Free Europe, who's a little bit, you may have read in the news, that is a bit...
well, they're suddenly realizing they made a mistake. In firing everybody.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, that's true all throughout the government and scientists and all these people. Oop, we need to get those guys back. They know what they're doing. They know how to make this work. Anyway, so Jackknife made two great records with the band. He really kind of, I feel like, was instrumental in those two records being as strong as they were at the end of their career. And I'm realizing the other day, I was thinking on it, it's been close to 20 years ago that we first met Jackknife.
I'm glad you brought up the live shows, because there's something I've been thinking about, which is they're just REM is an amazing live band. And my first time seeing them was in Cleveland on I think it was the Green Tour at the Coliseum. So I guess that was their big kind of first arena
89.
tour.
89.
Yeah. And it was incredible. And in fact, it wasn't my favorite of their records, but just seeing them perform, and Michael as a frontman is just, it was electric. I'd never seen a frontman like that before. It was like you just couldn't take your eyes off him. He was incredible. So I'm curious, from Backstage, in the role you've had all these years, you've seen many shows of theirs all over the world. You're never going to have an electric show with a dull band. But when you have a band that's really exciting live, there are still high points in their performance career. And what degree do you attribute that to the setting and the crowd response? And what degree do you attribute it to the band themselves? And again, I know it's both, really. Maybe talk about a show or two where you're like, even that was amazing. Like, what are those shows?
Well, it's definitely both, but I'll tell you, like, I look back to the 95 tour and I made a list. I just kind of went through and made a list of what I thought the best shows were at the end of the year. It was a way to keep from, I journaled. That's one of the only years I've ever kept a journal, a diary. And at the end of the year, I kind of just went through it and just thought, okay, what were the greatest shows? And one of them was in Chicago, but the two that were clearly, and other people have agreed, Madrid that year, and Auckland, New Zealand. And they were very different shows. Auckland was outdoors at a place called the County Bowl, and it was real rainy and muddy. And Madrid was I think it was in a velodrome, if I don't have that mistaken, but it was an arena. But it was a bicycle arena. It was like, here it'd be a hockey or a basketball arena, but there it was a biking arena. And in both cases, the crowd was just from the get-go. I'm pretty sure it was the band's first time they'd ever been in New Zealand. I may be wrong on that. They might have gotten there in 89 as well. But it was certainly the first time they'd been in a huge, I think it was a 30,000 seat stadium. And then Spain, Italy, you're just guaranteed from the time the band walks on stage, it's going to be fever pitch in terms of the crowd reaction. That's just at least when it comes to REM, probably other bands too. But they're so into it, they're so excited about it, and loud about it, and appreciative about it. Ireland is the other one. When we would talk about our, the places you could go as REM and know that the crowds were going to be coming from all over the country, for the show in Dublin. We actually did play a show in Belfast. Trying to remember what else. Almost always we played in Dublin, because even in those days when the roads weren't quite as expressway like they are now, people came. People were used to going to Dublin. So you had certain places where there were pockets of REM fans, and people would make it a destination and make it a weekend. But yeah, and then there were just certain nights that the band was just on a certain way. And when you got those two things together, you have a very, very memorable show. And there were a ton of them, as you know.
Yeah. So the last year or so, it seems like there's been a little bit of a boomlet. There was certainly the Bear, used a lot of REM in their soundtrack, and that I think attracted a lot of new listeners. I assume it did.
New season coming up, season 4 coming up. I think it starts like next week or something. I didn't see.
I
it's on my social media. I think it comes next week.
I had not seen that. I'm excited.
Those
about
guys,
that.
I think the guys who created the Bear are pretty big REM fans, and I think they first saw them in Chicago. I think they're from Chicago. Kind of makes sense. And REM played Chicago during the Monster Tour. I think that was an early introduction to them.
There's also been a couple of moments that have garnered a lot of YouTube attention in my household, certainly, where the band found themselves back on stage in Athens together a little bit. Can you either quash my dreams or give us hope that we might see more of them at some point?
In order, yes and no. Quash your dreams, yes. Give you hope, no. I'm pretty sure they're not going to get back together. I mean, if they do, maybe they will, but I don't expect it, and I think it's pretty unlikely. They've said it's finished. They're really happy with the career they had. They're proud of the career they had. They're all doing other stuff now. And I thought the answer Peter gave to anybody who hasn't seen it, the Anthony Mason interview that was done, and it was on CBS Mornings, and it was right around the time of the Songwriter Hall of Fame. And he's a really good interviewer, like you guys. And he just said, he was talking.
He gets better paid than we do.
At this table, he was talking to him, and he goes, "Why wouldn't you? I mean, you're all still here. You could, why not?" And Peter just had a really quick, classic Peter Buck answer. He didn't take many words. He just said, "It would never be as good," which is a pretty good way of putting it. And so that's there are 2 times there are 3 times recently they played together. Which has been one was for the Songwriter Hall of Fame, which when you get chosen to be in the Songwriter Hall of Fame, it's a pretty huge honor. And for the REM guys, was the biggest honor they've gotten. That was the peer review, peer chosen, selective. I mean, I felt like great. They're being recognized for their songwriting, which they should be based on everything they've done. But you don't ever assume that, and a lot of great bands, great artists aren't in the Songwriter Hall of Fame. So that was a huge thing for them. And all that's requested is to make sure that you are willing to come. Nobody phones it in. Nobody sends a video. You got to be there in the room in New York City at a hotel. So that's the only thing that's kind of required. But then obviously, if you're still able to, it's nice if you'll play. So they agreed that they would play. Kept it a secret. Didn't tell anybody. And we found out a long time ago the best way to keep a secret is keep a secret. Don't tell anybody. You don't tell even one person, because they always need to tell just one person. It's fun to share a secret. So they did play the one song. And do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what song they played?
I'm blanking on it. I've seen the video and I can't remember now.
They played "Losing My Religion," and they decided they wanted to play it acoustically. It's a song that lends itself to an acoustic treatment. That song would lend itself to a cappella treatment, but it sounds better with the mandolin. It sounds better with guitar, and in Bill's case, some bongos. But yeah, they did an acoustic "Losing My Religion." People start saying, well, why not a second song? Why not one of the rock? Like, we're keeping it pretty simple here. They did one song. It's the song they're most known for to this day. It's the song that people, when they hear it, in whatever context, it's the song people immediately identify, whether they know it's REM or they just know the song. It's one of their great songs. And so that was the thing that was kind of like, we'd known about it for several months, just didn't talk about it. It happened. It got a great response. in conjunction with the 2-part Anthony Mason interview on CBS. I think it recognized the band all these years later for their body of work and the most important thing to them, which is writing the songs that will live on way beyond anybody that's here now. And then the second time it kind of happened 2 years in a row is that there's this group of friends of ours, friends themselves, all pretty much Chicago-based. And they are led by Michael Shannon, who is a very good actor who's been in a bunch of movies and television appearances from Chicago. Also in a bunch of plays. He's in a play right now in London.
Great.
And he's great. So he's named Michael. He plays the Michael Stipe part because he's a huge fan. Grew up with REM in rural Kentucky. Actually, not rural. I think he was in Lexington, Kentucky. But he was like a townie listening to this band from his part of the country that he could really relate to and really like. But we're a good bit older than him. He was just a teenager when our guys were well into their 20s. And so another guy named Jason Narducci, who's a Chicago-based musician, and then some other musicians, John Worcester from Chapel Hill, who's a drummer, John Stearett from Wilco, that plays bass, and then two other guys, Dag and BJ. They went around the country playing. First they did Murmur, and then last year they did Fables the Reconstruction. And next year they're going to do Life's Rich Pageant. They basically just become, they don't really want to be called a tribute band or a cover band, but I don't know what you call it. They're just a band of friends that all love REM, and they've learned a ton of REM songs because the way the shows go, they play a dedicated part of the set. The first bit is in order, the album, Murmur, and the second part of the set is the REM songbook. Then last year they did Fables, Pillar to Post, and then the REM songbook. They know stuff from Chronic Town, they know stuff from Reckoning. They've played basically every song from Reckoning, even though they didn't have a tour dedicated to that. So anyway, it's kind of a lark for them. It's a slow time of the year in February when there's not all that much going on otherwise. They kind of just book the time out and take 5 weeks and go play these shows around the country. They've done very well with it. And both times they've been in Athens, all 4 of our guys have shown up. Several of them still live here or come home here a lot. And one of them flies in for it. And nobody expected this last time. Peter, Mike, and Bill played with them the first time they were through town. Michael just went to the show. This last time, Michael got up on stage. Nobody expected it, including, I think, the guys I'm not sure he had told Jason and Jason Narducci and Michael Shannon. But the next thing you know, Stipe's up on stage singing Pretty Persuasion, which is kind of an underrated in early years. It's a song that was never a big hit. I guess it was a single, but I don't really remember if it was a single. It was on Reckoning. It's a great song. It was one of those early days great songs, of which there were lots, and they couldn't all be singles. But Pretty Persuasion is as good as any of them. And it was awfully fun to hear. But it was 10 people on stage. This was not just the 4 guys, Barry Buckmill, Stipe. And it's at this age and time of your life, you're not going to get mad about it. But it did kind of rankle me to see the word reunion in the headlines, because that implies a reunion. No. The guys jumped on stage. It was somewhat spontaneous. Stipe surprised everybody, probably a little bit even, including himself, because it's a great song. And he just felt like getting up there and singing it. He knew it'd really be fun. And, of course, it got passed around on YouTube and all that. So that was all good. And, why not? It's a good thing. But, yeah, there's no need to have people saying, hey, do they want to go on tour next year? And it's great. People would be interested in it, but I don't think they are. That's my short answer to a long question.
That's
if y'all
great.
need to edit
That's
this,
great.
feel free.
Oh, no.
No.
Love these details.
We are fans of people extrapolating. I want to ask about a moment that I personally loved that I don't know if it was that I had a sense of in 2004. They did a little bit of a tour with Bruce Springsteen in support of the Kerry campaign. And I have this moment I remember of them, I think it was the first night in Philadelphia, up on stage playing Born to Run with the band, and just looking up and looking at Mike in particular, looking like this is the happiest a human being can possibly be.
Pretty much.
And
agreed.
Yeah, I'm just
over
curious
there
if
on the
you
wall.
had any recollection of
I have
that.
a picture of that over on the wall right over there.
Oh, cool.
Mike gets to do the whoa, 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 whoa. He gets to do the backing vocal there with the E Street Band. No, that was pretty. That was when we finished that tour. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that was the question.
But yeah, that's true. And we actually have that. That's on kind of my wall of great memories and fun stuff. But when we finished that tour, we said, well, there's only one real problem with this whole tour. First of all, we'd had to tear up our tour to go do that 2 weeks worth of shows and then go back to our tour, which was fine. We were more than happy to do that. We had enough time to make that work, and it was an important thing. And maybe it'll help. I guess maybe it did help, but the only problem with it was now we know what the highlight of our career is. It's hard. It's never going to be topped. You know, you've had the highlight of your career. I guess from here on out, it's just whatever else happens. That was true. It's kind of hard to top that. It was pretty special. But then the best one was a few nights later in Minneapolis, because the way it went Philly, Cleveland, Detroit, and then there wasn't one state everybody was going to go to. It was kind of the upper Midwest. So a couple of the bands went. This is Pearl Jam and Dixie Chicks and Dave Matthews. Some people went to Wisconsin. We went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, played the XL Center. And that night, Neil Young came too, and he played during the encore. So there's Neil, Bruce, REM guys, and E Street Band all on stage together. And I'm pretty sure the songs they did, I'm sure you can look this up on the internet. I'm pretty sure it was Rockin' in the Free World, and definitely it was all along the Watchtower. And it was pretty spectacular. It was right up there with my early heroes, Springsteen and Neil Young and the REM guys. So pretty special.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's been 21 years ago. Wow.
Yeah. I saw a comment about, I can't remember where, but how the band or one of the band members was a big fan of Ride at a certain point, probably in the 90s, and would listen to them. I've forgotten too much for this to be a useful anecdote, but I'm curious about the music that played the most in when you guys weren't on stage.
No answer. No idea. I mean, I think they all had different taste.
Yeah.
I don't think there was not like a playlist committee of, I just think Peter listened to stuff he listened to. I think they all liked certain things that were older than them, or somebody hear a new band. I mean, one of the ways they picked opening bands was bands they liked. And they must have liked Mercury Rev that year that Deserters song came out.
Yeah, that's
they
record.
Went on tour with. It's a tremendous record. And obviously they all loved the 10,000 Maniacs, a lot of their career, and Natalie after the Maniacs. It was my easiest thing in the world was people would ask me about getting their band REM tour, and I'd say, well, they pick bands they like. I mean, they pick bands they want to see on stage before they go on, because they make a point of watching the opening bands. They want it to be somebody they like.
All right, well, David, I guess if we start a band, they're going to need to have a reunion. Then we're going to have to get on their playlist. Then it's a long road.
They've got
for
time
us.
to plan, because first we have to learn.
Not a playlist. There's not. A playlist.
First we have to learn how to play instruments. So it might take a little while before we can get there. But one question I think that maybe we can wrap up with, that I'm curious about, looking from where you sit at the music industry today, and it's such a different beast than it was in 1980, and it was such a different beast then than it was in 1960.
Sure.
Would a group of four guys in Athens, Georgia, who wanted to make good music and had the ability to do it, have a harder or easier time today, and why?
Well, there's no real answer to that. It's certainly easier to get your music out there. Do you remember the band The Cranberries?
Yeah.
They had an album, I'm pretty sure it was called If It Was Easy, Everybody'd Be Doing It. That was the name of an album. It was like one of their big albums that had a bunch of hits on it. Well, it's easy now. Anybody can record and get it out there. But what does that do? It creates this, there used to be a difficult system to get the ticket to the lottery. which was a record deal. If you got lucky enough and you played and wrote enough songs and had, a couple of breaks and got the attention of the right people and got a deal, and then the people at the label were supportive and they got your song on the radio, there was sort of a prescribed path. There were gatekeepers, and if you got if you played your cards right and a few breaks went your way, maybe you got a record deal. And once you got a record deal, it was still not easy. It was certainly never a guaranteed success at all. It was the opposite of that. But there was kind of a way you did it. And now it's harder to imagine how it's going to go other than you just play. You play and you hopefully get good people on your side that are advocating for you and that you trust and are trustworthy. Yeah, but there's just so many more ways to get your music out there with streaming and all the various avenues for having people hear your music. It's also harder. It used to be pretty simple. You put something out and you got put in a box and some plastic, and there was an economic transaction that eventually, at least some of that filtered back to the artist. And that's still the case with streaming. It's just different economics. And it's just a much, much bigger playing field. Without the gatekeepers, without the record deals, so much more music is released now that your little slice of it just gets smaller and smaller. But are bands doing it? Absolutely. There are bands in Athens doing it. There are record companies still going. Obviously, the streaming companies are still going. Obviously, bands are still playing shows. Festivals are still going, unless it rains. So is it easier or harder? In some ways, I hate to have all these answers be kind of equivocal, but in some ways it's easier. It's certainly easier to get your music out. Right. Well, the classic law professor's answer to things is you ask me something, I go, well, what do you think? Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great one to end on, Bertis. You've been so generous with your time and stories, and it's an incredible career and a tribute to all the work the band has done and the team around them, and certainly you have done to bring us all these masses that you guys barely, you couldn't possibly know all the fans, but it's brought so much joy to the world and all of us, and that you layer it with social impact that has always been important to clearly everyone in that universe it makes it even more meaningful.
Well, what a time right now, huh? But thank you both for what you do and for talking to me, and hope it didn't go on too long. Feel free to edit it. If anything needs to be cleaned up, just let me know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has really been great.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Bertis.
Take care.
This Honda Civic has been held up as the best value in a four-door import. But now there's the 86 Colt DL. Same size engine, same front-wheel drive, same room for 5, but they're not the same. The Colt is less expensive by $870, flat. Colt, imported for Dodge and Plymouth, built by Mitsubishi in Japan. Colt, it's all the Japanese you need to know.
Dave, we're back. I am still giddy about having been part of that conversation.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Bertis is great, interesting, surprising, all the things. And also, I guess it makes sense that a lawyer would have an encyclopedic knowledge of all these things from the band and their history, but I still found myself really impressed with him referencing specific shows decades ago and certain gigs from 40 years ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I loved. I have to say, the thing that almost stuck in my head the most was, was just that Peter Buck quote about the reunion thing, and just like it wouldn't be as good, and that to me like sums up them. Like clearly they're leaving a lot of money on the table, right? And clearly they enjoy being together, and are still friends, or at least seem to be. But that to have that recognition of like, we did this thing. It was great, and now we're doing other things, because they're all doing other things still now, right? just seems so much the essence of them. And it's funny. I was just before we started recording, actually, my wife and I were talking about whether we wanted to buy tickets to go see a Violent Femmes show who are coming to town. And it's kind of like, it almost seems like it would be sad to see that, they had their moment of being this, breathtaking new vital thing, and they're clearly not that in 2025, and doesn't mean that they're not doing something useful, but they're not that anymore. And like, I don't need to go see the reunion thing. I'd rather go see someone who has got that kind of vibrancy and that kind of freshness to them today, right?
Yeah, I debate that, and I've seen some bands who are past their sort of commercial heyday playing later on, and absolutely they have the right, and the fans want to see them. And in fact, just this week,
I think we're definitely in a minority in not wanting to go to the reunion stuff.
Well, I'm not like, I will go to reunion stuff. Not a lot. It depends on the act. But just this week, an act I really loved, an industrial band called Nights Are Ebb from the 80s and 90s. Their frontman, Douglas McCarthy, died of cancer
I didn't see
prematurely.
that.
He was still in his 50s. He was 58. It was just tragic. He was a really good frontman, really intense, really amazing, like muscular voice. Yeah, and
I never knew how to pronounce that before, so thank you for that too.
Yeah. And I'd seen them in their heyday, and when I saw some recent recordings of them performing, and it was not what it once was, but it was still pretty good. And also with bands that are quite visual, the visual shows sometimes are better than they were in their heyday, because they have, the technology has expanded, and LED lights are really changing how and what you can do with a light show. So I I was like, man, it would have been nice to see them again. And of course, mainly sad that he passed. But anyway, that was great. The other thing that he said that, or he kind of said over and over in different ways, was, we were kind of asking him questions as though, like, what was your imprint on the band? And his response was always, well, I did what the band wanted. Like, he followed their lead. It's very clear that he regarded the band as the central thing, and his role was to support them and not to take credit for their achievements. And that was just kind of a very, probably undersold himself in that way, but also a classic good lawyer.
It is nice in this day and age to come across an actually humble person, and he seemed to be genuinely that. Dave, I'm going to steal your line from our little script here and say that enough of all this, because all this chatter is keeping our audience from what they really want, which is some goddamn wormholes.
It is true. It is time for us to play our beloved brand new Wormholes theme, where and then share a bit of knowledge that we've gained in the time since our last pod. And we then have a Wormholes outro, and then everyone will be just a little bit smarter and happier than they were beforehand. So here's some music.
So here is my wormhole, Dave, and it relates to something that happened in my life today, which is that I, for the first time ever, went to see a chiropractor this morning, which is something I had always been kind of leery of, even though I've had back pain for decades. And I was always leery of it, and I wasn't sure why. And I decided last night to dig a little research on this, and I realized that, like, for a long time, chiropractic was in fact seen as sort of this quackish thing. And I have this vague memory that my grandmother used to go to a chiropractor that she swore by, and my parents thought that was like akin to her going to see a witch doctor or something, and it was silly. And that a lot of early stuff in the chiropractic world was like the first the person who's acknowledged as the father of chiropractic, the first patient that he treated apparently was a deaf person, and he claimed that he was able to get him to hear by adjusting his spine, and they sometimes make these outlandish claims, and the AMA was really trying to shut them down for years and all this stuff. But that in recent years, apparently, there has been this acceptance of it and much more research being done into the effects of spinal adjustment. And I think they've toned down their act somewhat in terms of what they claim they can do. And it's just kind of interesting to see something make that evolution from, from the fringes to the mainstream in that way.
David, I feel that if this were the Gong Show, as recently referenced,
are you going to gong me?
I'm gonging you, man. I'm gonging your wormhole. Chiropractors? Jesus. We're trying to celebrate the I don't know, maybe I'm just a little too sensitive about aging. I don't know, but I have gone to a chiropractors for most of my adult life. My dad does too. I like them. But I'm sitting here, I'm dying a little as you keep talking about it.
All right. Well, maybe I went on too long, Dave, but it was a goddamn good point to make. And I will say, by the way, that I was discussing the podcast with the chiropractor, and he said he was going to listen. So, Dr. Miller, thank you for your good work if you're out there.
And thank you to all the chiropractors in this world who are working to make us feel better. I should not have been so mean. My back is probably going to seize up as punishment for my offhanded. Now you get to gong me because at any point in the future, because that's I don't know if we should do that or not, but it happened.
I think the next time we need to have an actual gong. But now it is your wormhole time, and Dave, just put me to shame. Just do something that is going to be so good and compelling that it will really make me feel low.
Oh, this is ultra important, significant, and enriching to all of the lives of everyone who's listening. It couldn't possibly get gonged. I will tell you that right now. And that is, of course, the chicken cannon. The chicken cannon.
Because we forgot to talk about it on the last episode.
No, I chose something else, but it's been sticking in my mind. I love those chicken cannons. So a chicken cannon, also known as a chicken gun, or I heard the Air Force sometimes uses the term rooster booster, which is kind of a personal favorite. But invented in the 1940s, it is a long-term tradition to test planes' ability to withstand incoming airborne foul that hits their engines, hits their windshields. And so they invented this contraption back in the early 40s where they take a frozen chicken and they shoot it at 700 miles per hour. I don't know what you can do to create a 700 mile per hour chicken shot, but they did it. That's, I guess, that's what you do with military R&D is you figure out how to fire chickens off at windshields. So,
well, here's the question, Dave. I'm going to just throw you off track for a second. My very limited understanding of physics is that when you get something moving that fast, it actually gains heat. So do the chickens get cooked as they're being shot at the planes?
That's a good, maybe we need to have a chicken cannon operator on the show to find out, because I am certainly not up on that science, and it did not come up in my Googling on this topic. So yeah, chicken cannons, they're still going to this day. I don't know if they have replaced them with some kind of similar projectile. I also learned that there are certain guns that can fire a flock of them, like a whole bunch of chickens at once, so they can see the impact. It's and I don't know, maybe we're going to get like the PETA protesting our show. That would probably help our help us in terms of general interest and controversy. Maybe we need a PETA controversy.
This could be our chance to join the anti-woke bandwagon. That seems to be a good way of generating hits. But Anyway, Dave, you clearly won this week's wormhole competition, and I think
Well, and
listening
if I
to that,
shot you with a chicken can, you'd have to go to a chiropractor for sure. So they're kind of
or
like
a
they can kind of,
morgue. I think probably a morgue at that
yeah,
point at
chickens
700 miles
8 pound.
an hour.
Yeah, that might
Yeah.
be the end of you.
But anyway, I think that from an audience's perspective, listening to wormholes like that just makes a person want to share and like and subscribe to Stupid Gen X Tricks. Don't you think, Dave?
It does, and it's a good way to prove your indie spirit and to avoid selling out. So go ahead and do all of that and leave a comment or a question so we can prove to those algorithm overlords that the people are excited and engaged.
All right. Even though that's really a form of us selling out because we want people to be excited and engaged so that we can attract more eyeballs and potentially, get rich and move to Belize. But
no, as long as we're unapologetic about whatever tasteless stuff we're doing, you get away with it. That's what happens in these times. That's the lesson for the children.
all right.
Just do something criminal and just say it right there on the surface, and
that's
you get
my
away
truth,
with it.
man.
Yeah.
That's my truth.
No. Don't use that language. That's the wrong language.
All right. Well, anyway, it is great, and all that's left for us to do now before we move on with our lives is tell people about the next episode, which will be a return to our series of going year by year through the years of our childhood and eventually into adolescence and probably adulthood, and then maybe by the time we get to it, even our golden years. We could end up talking about years that haven't occurred yet. On this podcast, there could be a 2027 episode, but which one will be next?
Well, next will be 1977. So get ready for lots of Star Wars, a bit of Roots, perhaps, and maybe even Reggie Jackson. So get ready.
So long. Farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Good night.
Good night and good luck.